The clatter of porcelain shattering against marble wasn't just the sound of a dropped plate. It was the sound of a life about to be irrevocably fractured. In the opulent heart of Aethelred's, where the city's elite dined in hushed reverence, a young waitress named Adeline stood frozen, her world shrinking to the horrified gasp of the dining hall. Before her, Jasper Fforde, the titan of industry whose face graced magazine covers and whose net worth dwarfed the GDP of small nations, stared at the ruin of his meal. But it wasn't the billionaire's icy glare that silenced the room. It was Adeline's next words, a whisper that carried the force of a tidal wave aimed directly at the most powerful man in the room. What she said next didn't just defy her position. It defied all logic, unearthing a secret that would unravel everything he had built. Aethelred's wasn't merely a restaurant. It was a statement, perched atop a skyscraper that pierced the clouds. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the sprawling city below, a glittering tapestry of lights that seemed to bow in deference to the establishment's clientele. The air within was thick with the scent of money, a subtle blend of expensive perfume, aged leather, and the delicate aroma of haute cuisine. Each table was an island of power, occupied by men and women who moved markets, shaped policies, and lived lives insulated from the mundane struggles of the world below. And then there was Adeline. At 23, Adeline was a ghost in this gilded cage. Her uniform, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, was her cloak of invisibility. She moved with a practiced grace, her steps silent on the plush carpet, her presence as unobtrusive as the soft classical music that drifted from hidden speakers. Her face framed by loose strands of honey-blonde hair that had escaped her tight bun, was pretty in a way that was easily overlooked, her soft grey eyes perpetually downcast. She was a master of the silent art of service, refilling water glasses without being asked, clearing plates with a feather-light touch, and anticipating the unspoken needs of the city's most demanding diners. To them, she was not Adeline. She was waitress, miss, or more often than not, nothing at all. She was a pair of hands, a function a necessary but ultimately forgettable part of the seamless experience they paid a small fortune to enjoy. And for the most part, Adeline was content with this anonymity. It was a shield, a way to navigate this world of staggering wealth without feeling the full crushing weight of her own circumstances. Each night after her shift, she would shed her uniform and her invisibility, taking the late-night bus back to a reality that was a universe away from Aethelred's. Her apartment was a cramped fifth-floor walk-up in a part of the city the restaurant's patrons only ever saw from their airplane windows. It was a space defined by its limations, the persistent drip of a leaky faucet, the rattling protest of the old radiator, and the ever-present stack of bills on her small kitchen table. She was the sole provider for her younger sister, a bright, bubbly 16-year-old named Chloe, who was battling a rare form of leukemia. The medical bills were a relentless tide, threatening to pull them both under, and Adeline's job at Aethelred's, with its generous tips from oblivious diners, was their only lifeboat. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, the gilded cage held its most formidable lion, Jasper Fforde. At 45, Jasper Fforde was a man carved from ambition and success. His face, with its sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and a hint of silver at the temples, was a familiar sight on the covers of Forbes and The Economist. He had built a tech empire from the ground up, a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in every corner of the digital world. His name was synonymous with ruthless innovation and a Midas touch that turned every venture into gold. He was a man who didn't just command respect. He radiated an aura of power that seemed to bend the very air around him. He was dining alone, a rare occurrence that had sent a ripple of nervous energy through the restaurant staff. He sat at the best table, the one in the corner with the most breathtaking view, a table that was usually booked months in advance. But for Jasper Ford, Ethelred's, like most places, made exceptions. He was a study in controlled intensity. His bespoke suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame, his movements precise and economical. He hadn't looked at the menu, simply ordering the chef's tasting menu and a bottle of wine that cost more than Adeline's monthly rent. Adeline's hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she approached his table. She had served powerful people before, politicians, celebrities, old money aristocrats. But Jasper Ford was different. He wasn't just wealthy. He was a force of nature, a man who reshaped the world to his will. She could feel his presence long before she reached the table, a palpable pressure in the air. "Your next course, Mr. Ford," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up from his tablet, where lines of code and financial projections scrolled in a mesmerizing dance. He simply gave a curt nod, a gesture of dismissal that made Adeline feel smaller than ever. The dish was a work of art, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops, saffron risotto, and a microgreen salad, all meticulously placed on a large, custom-made porcelain plate. It was heavier than the standard restaurant china. And as Adeline leaned forward to place it on the table, a series of unfortunate events conspired against her. A busboy, new and flustered, bumped into her from behind. It was a slight jostle, one she would normally have absorbed with ease. But tonight, her nerves were stretched taut, her grip on the heavy plate already precarious. The porcelain slipped from her trembling fingers, seeming to hang in the air for a heart-stopping moment, a silent tableau of impending disaster. And then it fell. The sound was shockingly loud in the hushed dining room. The plate didn't just break. It exploded, shattering against the polished marble floor with a deafening clatter. Shards of white porcelain skittered across the floor, and the vibrant colors of the scallops and risotto became a grotesque smear at the base of Jasper Ford's expensive Italian shoes. The entire dining hall fell silent. The soft music seemed to die away, the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation ceasing as every eye in the room turned to the scene of the crime. The restaurant manager, a portly, perpetually anxious man named Mr. Harrison, was already rushing over his face a mask of apoplectic horror. Adeline stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The end of her job. The end of the tips that kept her sister alive. She could already feel the cold dread of unemployment, the gnawing fear of the mounting medical bills. Her mind raced a chaotic jumble of apologies and excuses, none of them adequate for the magnitude of her offense. Jasper Ford slowly lifted his head, his gaze finally detaching from the screen of his tablet. His piercing blue eyes, cold and analytical, settled on her. There was no anger in them, no flicker of annoyance. There was something far worse, a complete and utter lack of emotion, the look of a man swatting away a fly. He opened his mouth to speak, and Adeline braced herself for the inevitable tirade, the condescending dismissal that would sever her from her lifeline. But before he could utter a single word, Adeline spoke. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the silence of the dining hall with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was a voice stripped of its earlier timidity, a voice that held a strange and unnerving authority. "The nightshade is late this year, isn't it, Mr. Ford?" The words hung in the air, nonsensical and yet charged with a terrifying significance. The nightshade is late this year. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a statement of fact delivered with a chilling calmness that was utterly at odds with the situation. It was a secret, a code, a key to a lock no one in that room even knew existed. A collective silent gasp seemed to ripple through the dining hall. The patrons who had been expecting a tearful apology or a swift dismissal were now united in a state of bewildered fascination. They exchanged confused glances, their hushed whispers now replaced by an intrigued silence. They were no longer just diners. They were an audience, and the drama unfolding before them was far more captivating than any dish Ethelred's could offer. Mr. Harrison, who had been about to unleash a torrent of panicked apologies and promises of compensation, froze mid-stride. His mouth hung open, his carefully prepared speech dying on his lips. He looked from Adeline to Mr. Ford, and back again, his face a comical mixture of confusion and terror. His world was one of strict hierarchies and predictable protocols. A waitress dropping a plate was a crisis, but a manageable one. A waitress speaking in cryptic riddles to a billionaire was a catastrophe of an entirely different order. But the most profound reaction came from Jasper Ford himself. The mask of indifference he wore so masterfully cracked. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something raw and unguarded passed through his icy blue eyes. It wasn't shock, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that resonated with a long-forgotten memory. The world seemed to slow down, the opulent dining room fading into the background, leaving only him and the young waitress who had just uttered a phrase he hadn't heard in 25 years. The nightshade. It was a name, a memory, a ghost he had buried deep in the recesses of his past, a past he had meticulously erased from his carefully constructed life. It was a name that belonged to a different world, a world of shadows and secrets, a world he had escaped to build his empire. He slowly lowered his tablet, placing it on the table with a soft click that echoed in the silent room. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white linen tablecloth, his gaze now locked on Adeline with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The other diners, the shattered plate, the horrified manager. They all ceased to exist. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. A predator who had just discovered an unexpected prey in its territory. Adeline's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her outward demeanor remained eerily calm. She had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. She had detonated a bomb, and now she had to navigate the fallout. "I'm just a waitress," she said. Her voice steady, though her hands, hidden in the folds of her apron, were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. "But I know about the girl who loved to paint belladonna flowers, the girl who disappeared on a rainy night in October." Another jolt went through Jasper Ford. He flinched a barely perceptible movement, but to Adeline, who was watching him with a hawk-like focus, it was as loud as a scream. He was no longer looking at a clumsy waitress. He was looking at a ghost from his past, a messenger from a life he thought he had left behind, forever. The dining hall was now a pressure cooker of suspense. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Who was this girl? What did she have to do with the powerful Jasper Ford? And how did this young, unassuming waitress know about her? Mr. Harrison, finally regaining some semblance of composure, decided to intervene. This was a situation far beyond his pay grade, a fire that needed to be extinguished before it consumed the entire restaurant. "Mr. Ford," I am so terribly sorry, he began, his voice trembling. This is unacceptable. I will personally handle this. Please allow me to move you to another table. Your entire meal, of course, will be on the house. And as for this girl, she will be dealt with immediately. He turned to Adeline, his face now a mask of cold fury. You're fired, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Get your things and get out, now. Adeline didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on Jasper Ford, a silent challenge passing between them. No, Ford said, his voice cutting through the manager's tirade. He raised a hand, a simple gesture that held an absolute authority. She stays. Mr. Harrison's jaw dropped for the second time that night. He stared at Ford, utterly stupefied. But, Ford, I said she stays, Ford, repeated, his voice now laced with an unmistakable threat. He turned his attention back to Adeline. You and I are going to have a conversation. In private. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, tossing a few $100 bills onto the table to cover the meal and the damages. Then he looked at Adeline, a silent command in his eyes. Adeline, with a newfound sense of purpose, untied her apron and let it fall to the floor, a symbolic shedding of her old identity. She was no longer just a waitress. She was something more. Something that had the power to make a man like Jasper Ford listen. Without a word, she turned and walked towards the exit, her back straight, her head held high. The entire dining hall watched in stunned silence as Jasper Ford, the billionaire titan, followed her. Leaving behind a shattered plate, a bewildered manager, and a room full of unanswered questions. The invisible girl had just made herself seen, and in doing so, she had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The whisper had broken the silence, and now the storm was about to break. The private elevator at Ethelred's was a small gilded cage, a mirrored box that reflected the tense silence between its two occupants. As they ascended to the penthouse suite, a space reserved for the most exclusive of guests, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver through the glass walls. Adeline stood on one side, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her reflection, a pale, determined ghost in the polished brass. Jasper Ford stood on the other, his back to her, staring out at the sprawling metropolis he had conquered. The silence was a living thing, thick with unspoken accusations, and a history that clawed at the present. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a suite that was the epitome of understated luxury. A vast living area with minimalist furniture, a grand piano in the corner, and a floor-to-ceiling fireplace that was currently dormant. The air were cool and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the dining hall below. Ford walked to the bar, a sleek black marble affair, and poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't offer one to Adeline. This was not a social visit. It was an interrogation. He turned to face her, his blue eyes cold and probing. You have 5 minutes, he said, his voice as sharp as broken glass. Start talking. Who sent you? What do you want? Money. Is this a shakedown? Adeline met his gaze without flinching. No one sent me, she said, her voice clear and steady. And I don't want your money, Mr. Ford. I want something far more valuable. I want the truth. A humorless smile touched Ford's lips. The truth, an admirable, if naive, pursuit. The truth is a commodity, young lady, and like all commodities, it has a price. What makes you think you can afford it? Because I already know half of it, she retorted, taking a step forward. I know about the nightshade. Not the flower, the girl. The artist. The one you left behind. Ford's hand tightened around his glass. You're playing a dangerous game, he warned, his voice a low growl. You're throwing around names and accusations you know nothing about. Don't I? Adeline's voice rose a tremor of long-suppressed anger, finally breaking through her carefully constructed calm. I know she was your partner. Not in business, not in the way your glossy biographies describe. You were partners in a different kind of venture, a more illicit one. You were hackers, the best in the city. You called yourselves Nyx and Erebus, rulers of the night. You weren't just building a tech empire, you were breaking into them. Ford's face was a mask of stone, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. She had hit a nerve, a deep-buried one. The story of his rise to power was a carefully curated narrative, a tale of a brilliant college dropout who built $1 billion company from his garage. There was no mention of a partner, no hint of a shadowy past. You stole data, proprietary, code, anything that could give you an edge. Adeline continued, her voice relentless. The nightshade, that was her signature. She'd leave behind a digital image of a belladonna flower, a beautiful but deadly calling card. You were unstoppable, the two of you, until one of you decided the partnership was no longer profitable. Ford slammed his glass down on the bar, the sound echoing in the silent room. That's enough. He snarled, his voice a whip crack of authority. You've had your fun. You've made your point. Now tell me what you want. I told you. I want the truth. Adeline insisted, her own anger now matching his. I want to know what happened to her. What happened to my mother? The words dropped into the silence like a stone into a still pond. The ripples spreading outwards, shattering the fragile composure of the powerful man before her. Jasper Ford stared at her, his face draining of color. The arrogance and the anger replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Your mother, he whispered, the words barely audible. Yes, Adeline said, her voice thick with emotion. The nightshade, the girl who loved to paint belladonna flowers. Her name was Evelyn, and you were the last person to see her alive. The fortress that was Jasper Ford, the impenetrable facade he had built around himself for 25 years, began to crumble. The past he had so ruthlessly buried had just shown up at his door with his daughter's eyes and a thirst for vengeance. He sank into one of the plush armchairs, his body suddenly heavy, his mind reeling. He looked at Adeline, truly looked at her for the first time, and he could see it. The ghost of Evelyn in the defiant tilt of her chin, the fierce intelligence in her grey eyes. It wasn't like that, he said, his voice hoarse. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Adeline shot back, her hands clenched at her sides. Tell me why my mother disappeared without a trace. Tell me why I grew up in foster care, thinking she had abandoned me. Tell me why the last trace of her existence is a cryptic phrase about a flower being late. The room was thick with the weight of unanswered questions, the ghosts of the past now demanding their due. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The billionaire was no longer in control. The waitress, the invisible girl, now held all the cards, and she was not going to let him fold. Jasper Ford, a man who had faced down hostile takeovers and government inquiries without so much as a flicker of unease, now looked like a man adrift in a storm of his own making. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture of a man whose carefully ordered world had been thrown into chaos. "I didn't kill her," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the words seeming to cost him a great deal of effort. "I loved her." Adeline let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "You loved her? Is that why you erased her from your life? Is that why there's not a single mention of her? Not a single photograph in the 25 years since she vanished? I did it to protect her." Ford's voice rose, filled with a desperate frustration. "And to protect you." He stood up and began to pace the room, a caged animal, trapped by the bars of his own past. "You're right," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the dormant fireplace. "We were partners, Nyx and Erebus. We were young, arrogant, and brilliant. We thought we were untouchable." He paused, his back to her, the memories of a different life playing out in his mind. "We weren't just stealing data for an edge. We were idealists. We targeted corrupt corporations, exposing their secrets, leaking their crimes to the press. We were digital Robin Hoods, or so we told ourselves." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. "But we flew too close to the sun. We hacked into the servers of a company called Omnicorp, a shady private military contractor with ties to rogue government agencies. We found something terrible, evidence of illegal arms deals, political assassinations, a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. We were going to release it," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It was going to be our masterpiece, the one that would finally make a real difference. Evelyn, your mother was the one who cracked their final firewall. She was a genius, a true artist with code. But they found us. Or rather, they found her." A chilling silence descended upon the room as the weight of his words sank in. "Omnicorp wasn't a company you stole from and walked away from, Ford," said his voice, grim. "They were ruthless. They had a reputation for making their problems disappear. Permanently. One of their executives, a man named Marcus Thorne, a truly soulless individual, contacted us. He knew who we were. He had pictures of Evelyn of our apartment. He had pictures of you as a baby." Adeline's blood ran cold. The story she had constructed in her mind, a story of betrayal and abandonment, was beginning to fracture, replaced by a far more terrifying reality. "Thorne gave us an ultimatum." Ford went on, his voice hoarse with the memory. "We were to hand over all the data we had stolen, and we were to disappear. If we didn't, he would kill Evelyn, and then he would come for you. He made it very clear that he would enjoy it." He walked over to the grand piano and lifted the lid, revealing not keys, but a hidden compartment. He reached inside and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it, and inside were two tiny, faded photographs. One was of a young, smiling woman with honey-blonde hair and mischievous grey eyes, the spitting image of Adeline. The other was of a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Evelyn was terrified, Ford said, his voice thick with emotion. Not for herself, but for you. She was the one who came up with the plan. It was her final masterpiece of deception. He handed the locket to Adeline. Her fingers trembled as she took it, her thumb tracing the familiar face of the mother she had only ever known from a single tattered photograph. She created a new identity for herself, Ford explained. A new life in a place where Omnicorp would never find her. And I was to become Jasper Ford, the ruthless billionaire, the titan of industry. I was to become so powerful, so untouchable, that I could build a fortress around myself, a fortress that would also protect you. The plan was for me to find you once you were old enough, once I was powerful enough to shield you from Thorn. He continued, his voice laced with a deep, aching regret. But things got complicated. Omnicorp never truly went away. Thorn kept tabs on me, a constant, silent threat. I had to erase every trace of Evelyn, every hint of our past, to keep you both safe. I had to become the man you see today, a man I despise. Adeline sank into a chair. The locket clutched in her hand, her mind struggling to process the seismic shift in her understanding of the world. Her mother wasn't a victim of a heartless lover. She was a hero, a woman who had sacrificed everything to save her child, and the man she had hated for so long, the man she had blamed for her mother's disappearance, was not a villain. He was a guardian, a silent protector who had worn a mask of ruthless ambition to shield her from a danger she never knew existed. The nightshade, she whispered the cryptic phrase, suddenly making a new heartbreaking kind of sense. It was our code, Ford confirmed, a sad smile touching his lips. Our fail-safe. If one of us was ever in trouble, we would use that phrase. The nightshade is late this year. It meant Omnicorp was closing in. It meant the plan had failed. He looked at Adeline. His blue eyes now filled not with coldness, but with a desperate paternal fear. Which brings us to tonight, Adeline. Why did you say it? How did you know that phrase? Adeline's own face paled. The truth she had unearthed was a double-edged sword. In clearing her mother's name, she had unknowingly stumbled into the very danger her parents had tried so hard to protect her from. Chloe, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My sister. She has leukemia. The medical bills. I've been taking on extra work. Data entry, freelance, coding. Anything I could find online. She looked up at Ford, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. A few weeks ago, I took a job from a company I'd never heard of. They wanted me to decrypt some old archived files. The pay was good, and I was desperate. The files were heavily encrypted, but I'm good at it. It's always come naturally to me. She paused, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a sickening finality. The company was called Omnicorp. The name Omnicorp hung in the air of the penthouse suite like a death sentence. The sterile, luxurious space suddenly felt like a trap, the floor-to-ceiling windows no longer offering a view of a conquered city, but a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. Jasper Ford's face, which had softened with the pain of his confession, now hardened into a mask of cold fury. But this time the fury was not directed at Adeline. It was aimed at the ghost that had haunted him for a quarter of a century, a ghost that was now threatening to consume his daughter. Thorn. He growled the name, a curse on his lips. He's been playing a long game. He didn't just keep tabs on me. He's been watching you. He began to pace again. His mind, the same mind that could navigate the treacherous currents of global finance, now racing to find a way out of this new, far more personal crisis. It wasn't a random job, Adeline. It was a test. He was testing you, seeing if you had inherited your mother's gift. And you did. You decrypted the files, you rang the dinner bell, and now he's coming for you. Adeline felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her desperation to save her sister had led her straight into the jaws of the wolf. The files. They were old financial records, shipping manifests. Nothing that seemed important. To you, maybe, Ford said grimly. But to Thorn, they were a loose end. a piece of the puzzle that could still connect Omnicorp to their dirty work. And now he knows there's someone out there who can read their secrets, someone with Evelyn's blood in her veins. The true terrifying nature of her situation began to dawn on Adeline. She had thought the greatest danger she faced was poverty, the crushing weight of her sister's medical bills. But now she was facing a far more lethal threat, a faceless, powerful enemy who had already made her mother disappear. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. The "we" hung in the air, a new and fragile alliance forged in the crucible of a shared danger. Ford stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective light. The billionaire was gone, replaced by a father who had just found the daughter he thought he had lost. "First we get you and your sister out of here," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "My security team can have you on a private jet and out of the country in an hour. We can set you up with new identities, a new life somewhere. Thorn will never find you." It was the same plan Evelyn had made all those years ago, a life on the run, a life in the shadows. But Adeline shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm, a spark of her mother's defiance in her eyes. "I'm not running. Chloe is in the middle of a new round of treatment. We can't just disappear. And besides," she added, her gaze meeting his, "they've been hunting my family for 25 years. It's time we started hunting them." Ford stared at her, a mixture of pride and terror in his eyes. She was Evelyn's daughter through and through, brave, reckless, and brilliant. "This isn't a game, Adeline," he warned. "Thorn is a monster. He has unlimited resources, and he operates outside the law." "And you're Jasper Ford," she countered, a steely resolve in her voice. "You have your own resources, an army of lawyers, security experts, and if what you told me is true, a skill set that has been dormant for far too long." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Ford's face. It was a smile she hadn't seen before, a smile that belonged not to the polished CEO but to Erebus, the king of the digital underworld. "It seems I have," he admitted, his blue eyes now gleaming with a renewed sense of purpose. "Thorn made one mistake. He thought he was hunting a ghost and her daughter. He doesn't know that Nyx and Erebus are back in the game." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The fear and confusion were replaced by a tense, electric energy. A plan began to form, a desperate, audacious gamble to turn the tables on their pursuer. "First things first," Ford said. "All business now." "Chloe." "Where is she? City General Hospital Oncology Ward," Adeline replied. Ford was already on his phone, his voice low and commanding as he spoke to his head of security, a man named Gavin. "I need a full security detail at City General Oncology Ward. Unmarked vehicles, plainclothes agents. I want them to be ghosts. No one sees them. No one knows they're there. And I want a medical team on standby for immediate patient transfer. The best. Money is no object." He hung up and looked at Adeline. "They'll be there in 20 minutes. Chloe will be safe." Next, he turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. Lines of code filled the screen, a language Adeline understood fluently. "Thorn thinks he's in the shadows," Ford said, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "It's time we turned on the lights." He was diving back into the world he had left behind, the world of backdoors, firewalls, and encrypted data streams. He was hunting for Thorn, for any digital footprint, any vulnerability he could exploit. Adeline pulled up a chair beside him, her own laptop open. He contacted me through a shell corporation. She said her own fingers a blur as she navigated through the complex web of her recent online activity. The payments were routed through a series of offshore accounts. But the initial job offer, it came through a server that bounced its IP address through half a dozen countries. But there was a flicker, a millisecond of a data lag as it routed through a server in Zurich. I made a note of it. I thought it was just a system glitch. Ford looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. A system glitch, he murmured. Evelyn used to call them digital breadcrumbs. Show me. For the next few hours, the penthouse suite was transformed into a war room. Father and daughter, united by a shared past and a common enemy, worked side by side, their combined genius a formidable weapon. They were no longer the Billionaire and the Waitress. They were Nyx and Erebus reborn. They followed the digital breadcrumbs, peeling back the layers of Thorne's carefully constructed anonymity. They hacked into Swiss bank records, rerouted satellite surveillance, and unleashed a wave of sophisticated malware that targeted Omnicorp's internal servers. And then they found it. A hidden file buried deep within Omnicorp's network, protected by a level of encryption that would have been unbreakable to anyone but them. It was a kill order. Not for Adeline, but for Chloe. It was scheduled for the next morning. Thorne wasn't just planning to eliminate a threat. He was planning to punish Adeline for her audacity to break her spirit before he destroyed her. A cold, primal rage, the likes of which he had not felt in 25 years, rose in Jasper Ford. This was no longer about the past. This was about the future. It was about his granddaughter, a girl he had never even met. He's not just hunting us anymore, Ford said, his voice dangerously calm. He's made this personal, and that's a mistake he'll live to regret. For all of 5 minutes. He looked at Adeline, his eyes like chips of ice. He thinks he's the hunter. It's time we showed him what it feels like to be the prey. The city lights glittered below, oblivious to the high-stakes battle being waged in the sky above. The game had changed. The rules had been rewritten. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Nyx and Erebus prepared to launch their counterattack. The invisible girl and the man who had hidden in plain sight were about to step out of the shadows, and hell was coming with them. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the sunrise brought no warmth to the penthouse suite. The room was a hive of activity, the quiet luxury now a backdrop for a high-stakes technological war. Empty coffee cups and hastily scribbled notes littered the marble tabletops. The air crackled with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. Jasper Ford, stripped of his bespoke jacket, his tie loosened, looked more like the renegade hacker of his youth than the polished billionaire on the cover of Forbes. There was a dangerous light in his eyes, a focus so intense it was almost terrifying. He was a man with everything to lose, and that made him a man with nothing to fear. Adeline, fueled by caffeine and a fierce protective love for her sister, matched his intensity. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a legacy from the parents she had barely known. She was no longer just fighting for Chloe's life. She was fighting for her family's honor, for the justice that had been denied them for so long. He's arrogant, Ford said, his eyes glued to a screen that displayed a complex architectural blueprint. Thorne has always believed he's the smartest man in the room. He'll want to be there himself. He'll want to watch. The blueprint was of City General Hospital. Ford's security team, the ghosts he had deployed, had not only secured Chloe's room, but had also managed to access the hospital's internal systems, providing them with a real-time layout of the entire facility. The kill order was for 7 a.m. Adeline said, her voice tight with tension. He'll use the morning shift change as cover. The chaos, the new faces, it's the perfect time to slip in unnoticed. Exactly, Ford agreed. But he won't be the one holding the syringe. Thorne doesn't get his hands dirty. He'll have a professional, someone who can get in and out without raising any alarms. And he'll be watching from a secure location, a nerve center, where he can monitor the operation and pull the plug if anything goes wrong. Their plan was twofold. First, protect Chloe at all costs. Second, use Thorne's arrogance against him, luring him into a trap of their own making. The first part of the plan was already in motion. Chloe, under the guise of a sudden but necessary transfer to a specialized private clinic, had been moved from City General in the dead of night. She was now safely ensconced in a state-of-the-art medical facility owned by Ford, surrounded by the best doctors and a security detail that would make Fort Knox look porous. The girl in the hospital bed in the oncology ward was a decoy, a highly realistic medical mannequin wired with sensors and cameras. The second part of the plan was far more audacious. They were going to let Thorne's assassin walk right into their trap, and they were going to use the opportunity to turn the tables to hack the hunter and expose him to the world. He'll be using a closed-circuit communication system. Adeline surmised, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she analyzed the hospital's network traffic. Something encrypted off the grid. He'll have a camera feed a direct link to his operative, and we're going to hijack it. Ford finished, a predatory smile on his face. We're not just going to stop him. We're going to give him a front-row seat to his own downfall. The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. Ford coordinated with his security team on the ground, his voice a calm, authoritative presence in their earpieces. He directed the placement of hidden cameras, the creation of digital tripwires, and the strategic positioning of his agents. Adeline, meanwhile, was engaged in a digital duel with Thorne's security protocols. It was a delicate dance, a game of cat and mouse played out in lines of code. She had to bypass his firewalls, decrypt his communication channels, and insert their own surveillance software without tipping him off. It was like trying to disarm a bomb while it was still ticking. At 6:45 a.m., they got a break. A new device logged onto the hospital's guest Wi-Fi network, a seemingly innocuous tablet belonging to a visitor. But Adeline, who was monitoring every bit of data that flowed through the network, saw it for what it was: a Trojan horse. It was Thorne's assassin, logging in to receive his final instructions. "I'm in," she whispered, her heart pounding. She had piggybacked on the assassin's connection, a digital ghost in his machine. She now had access to his communications, his camera feed, everything. Thorne's nerve center, Ford, commanded his eyes fixed on a screen that was now displaying a distorted video feed from the assassin's hidden camera. "Find him!" Adeline worked feverishly, tracing the signal back through a labyrinth of proxy servers and encrypted relays. It was a global goose chase, bouncing from a server in Iceland to a satellite over the Pacific, before finally resolving to a single, fixed location. "Got him," she announced, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. A penthouse suite at the top of the Omnicorp Tower downtown. Ford's smile was chilling. "Of course," he said. "The hubris. He's going to watch it all go down from his own throne room." He turned his attention back to his own screen, where he was now pulling up the blueprints for the Omnicorp Tower. "Gavin," he said into his earpiece, "change of plans. I want a team at the Omnicorp Tower, full tactical gear. They are to await my signal, and they are to be prepared for heavy resistance." The trap was set. The pieces were in place. All they had to do now was wait. The video feed from the assassin's camera showed him moving through the hospital corridors, disguised as a male nurse. He was calm, professional, his movements efficient and purposeful. He reached the oncology ward, nodding to the real nurses, his presence unremarkable. He entered Chloe's room. The decoy mannequin lay still in the bed, a perfect imitation of a sleeping teenager. The assassin approached the bed, pulling a syringe from his pocket. In the Omnicorp tower, Marcus Thorne watched on a massive screen, a glass of champagne in his hand, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. He was about to extinguish the last embers of a fire that had been smoldering for 25 years. And in the penthouse suite of Ethelred's Jasper Ford, and Adeline watched him watch. Now Ford whispered into his microphone. On the screen in Thorne's office, the image of the sleeping girl in the hospital bed suddenly flickered. It was replaced by a live feed of Thorne himself, sitting in his office, champagne in hand. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He stared at his own image, the reflection of his smug satisfaction, now a damning indictment. Then a new face appeared on the screen, a face he had not seen in 25 years, but one that had haunted his dreams. It was a younger Jasper Ford, a digital ghost from the past, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury. "Hello, Marcus," the image of the young Ford, said his voice echoing through the silent office. "It's been a long time. Did you miss me?" The screen split now, showing not just Thorne's office, but dozens of other feeds, newsrooms, federal agencies, the trading floor of the stock exchange. The private screening had just become a global broadcast, and then the final piece of the trap was sprung. The data that Nix and Erebus had stolen from Omnicorp all those years ago, the evidence of illegal arms deals and political assassinations, began to scroll across the screen, a torrent of irrefutable proof of Thorne's crimes. The hunter had just walked into a cage of his own making, and the whole world was watching. In the Omnicorp tower, Marcus Thorne's world shattered. The smug reflection on his massive screen was replaced by a live feed of his own shocked face, broadcast for the world to see. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers. This wasn't a private victory. It was a public execution. He scrambled to cut the feed to regain control, but his frantic commands were useless. He was a prisoner in his own digital fortress. Erebus had returned and seized the kingdom. From the Ethelred's penthouse, Ford and Adeline watched the tyrant's downfall. "He's trying to wipe the servers," Adeline reported, her fingers a blur. "But he's locked out. I'm making copies. Lots of them." A grim smile touched Ford's lips. "Good girl." Now for the grand finale. With a few keystrokes, he initiated the final attack. The screen behind Thorne, visible to every newsroom and federal agency, now watching, filled with a new file, the kill order for Chloe. Her name, her medical records. The cold, bureaucratic language detailing her planned murder. It was all there, an irrefutable testament to Thorne's monstrosity. In the hospital, the assassin, syringe in hand, froze as his own tablet displayed the damning evidence. He looked from the screen to the decoy in the bed, realizing he'd walked into an elaborate trap. The door burst open, and Ford's agents swarmed in. A professional who knew when the game was lost, the assassin surrendered without a fight. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, closing in on the Omnicorp tower. The game was over. But a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. With a snarl of defiance, Thorne slammed a hidden switch. A heavy steel blast door sealed his office, and a red timer appeared on his screen, counting down from 5 minutes. "What is he doing?" Adeline cried. Ford's face went white with horror. He knew the protocol. The self-destruct. A thermite charge in the server room. He's going to incinerate the entire floor. He grabbed his comms unit. Gavin abort. Get the team out. It's a trap. But his tactical team was already on the penthouse floor, trying to breach the blast door. They were caught. Ford felt a wave of cold dread. In his quest for vengeance, he had led his own men to their deaths. Adeline, however, refused to surrender. The door is electronic, she said, her focus absolute. I can bypass the manual override. It was a desperate race against a ticking clock, a duel between a girl with a laptop and a madman's final fiery act. The timer flashed the 3 minutes. 2. Her mind worked with a stunning clarity, a fire in her veins inherited from her mother. She dove into the system's code, finding a vulnerability, a hidden back door she recognized with a jolt. It was a secret signature left by Evelyn years ago, a digital breadcrumb her mother had unknowingly left for her to find. I'm in, she breathed. The timer read 90 seconds. In the corridor outside Thorne's office, the tactical team heard a loud click as the blast door slid open. They stormed in to find Thorne standing in the center of the room, a wild, triumphant look in his eyes, a detonator in his hand. Too late, he sneered. You can't stop it now. Suddenly, Jasper Ford's face filled the screen behind him. It's over. Marcus, his voice boomed. The world knows what you are. Thorne hesitated, his thumb hovering over the button. That single moment of doubt was all the opening the team needed. A taser fired, and the detonator clattered to the floor. The timer hit 0. There was no fiery explosion, only a soft metallic click. The sequence was disarmed. In the Ethelred's penthouse, Adeline slumped in her chair, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion washing over her. She had done it. Ford rushed to her side, his hand on her shoulder. His eyes filled with a pride and love that needed no words. He had set out to save his daughter, but in the end, she had saved them all. The reckoning was over. The ghosts of the past were gone. As the sun rose, casting its golden light over the city, it marked a new dawn, a day of truth, of justice, and of a family broken for so long, finally made whole. The days following the reckoning were a media firestorm. The Omnicorp scandal dominated global headlines, a modern epic of corruption, brought down by the ghost-like hackers Nyx and Erebus. While the world clamored for its new heroes, Jasper Ford and Adeline retreated, allowing the story to unfold without them. Stepping back from his empire, Ford gave a single terse press conference, framing himself as a victim of corporate espionage who had aided the authorities. It was a final protective deception. Marcus Thorne, stripped of his dignity and power, faced a lifetime behind bars, his empire in ruins. Freed from the crushing weight of her old life, Adeline found the transition jarring. The constant struggle for survival had been her identity for so long that its absence left a void. The 5th floor walk-up was gone, replaced by a sunlit apartment, and Chloe, responding well to world-class medical care, was on the road to a full recovery, delighted to discover her quiet sister was a superhero. Adeline and Ford spent long afternoons together, tentatively bridging the 25-year chasm that had separated them. In the quiet of his library, he resurrected her mother for her, with stories and faded photographs, sharing Evelyn's laugh, her passion, and her fierce love. Adeline, in turn, shared the details of her own life, the struggles and the quiet bond with Chloe. They were two survivors, haunted by the same ghosts, slowly learning to be family. One afternoon, Ford handed her a gift, the finest paints and canvases along with a brochure for the nation's top art school. "Your mother would have wanted you to follow your dreams," he said, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. Tears filled Adeline's eyes. It wasn't just a gift. It was a future, a life beyond fear and necessity. "And you?" she asked later as they sat in the garden. "Will you go back to being the billionaire?" Ford looked toward the horizon, a genuine peace settling on his features for the first time. "Jasper Ford was a fortress," he said softly. "I don't need it anymore. It's time for Erebus to retire and for Jasper to finally learn how to be a father. And a grandfather." The invisible girl had found her future. The man hidden in plain sight had found his heart. The nightshade had been late, but spring had finally arrived, and with it the promise of a new and beautiful bloom for a family made whole. The story of Adeline and Jasper Ford is a powerful reminder that heroes can be found in the most unexpected of places, in a quiet waitress with a fire in her heart, in a billionaire haunted by his past. It's a story about the enduring power of family, the courage to fight for the truth, and the incredible things that can happen when the invisible find their voice. Their journey from a shattered plate to a shattered empire is a testament to the fact that no matter how powerful the darkness, a single spark of light can set the world ablaze. If their story moved you, if it reminded you of the hidden strengths within us, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might need a reminder that their own voice has power. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will shock, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Click that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.